Good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the Lowy Institute for International Policy, to a very, very special session of our Distinguished Speakers series. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Martine Letz. I'm the Deputy Director of the Lowy Institute for International Policy. And it's my great honour today to introduce to you one of the Pacific's most enduring and defining political leaders, Grand Chief, the Right Honourable Sir Michael Somare. Sir Michael will talk to us today about the Pacific region's challenges. Please join me in welcoming Sir Michael Somare, Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea.
Thank you. Thank you. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here today to deliver a statement to an audience organized by Lowy Institute, an institute that has over the years encouraged exchange of ideas and dissemination of information on Papua New Guinea. In a country where Papua New Guinea is often misunderstood because the lack of accurate or sometimes highly sensationalized reporting, and I believe I owe it to the Lowy Institute to accept the invitation to be here today. I was asked to address you today on an issues challenging, facing our region. Consequently, I have chosen climate change and the need to rethink traditional economic theory and market constructs. As I have highlighted in so many times in so many of my meetings, climate change is real and upon us. I know some skeptics in the scientific community ridicule the assertion as not supported by what they call unquestionable empirical evidences. Well, some of us do not need science to provide the phenomenon. We live it. Papua New Guinea and many of our Pacific Island neighbors, including Australia, are already suffering dire consequences. Symptoms and evidence of climate change are all there for everyone to see. They include, but not limited to, bleached coral reefs that are starving our fisheries, atoll-based communities that are disappearing under the rising waves, mosquitoes that are moving up our high mountain ridges and killing children of malaria. We find beaches eroded away and suffocated by the swelling seas. Mighty trees, once high up on the beach, now drowned, felled, and sinking under the surface. Ladies and gentlemen, in fact, in my own village, we have moved for the 4th time in one generation in order to escape flooding on one side and sea level rise on the other. We are probably among the first environmental refugees. Our mangrove ecosystems, and in fact our very way of the life, is being destroyed, and the destruction toll is growing steadily. We need to act, and we need to act now. As we consider remedies for the growing crisis, we must look deep within. We must question past assumptions, redefine ourselves, and reach towards a new vision of sustainability. So often, we often tend to focus on the negative: environmental degradation, catastrophic climate change, high unemployment, crippling poverty, and the list goes on. My vision and that of my government is to transform these challenges confronting our society into a framework for environmentally and socially sustainable economic growth. Obviously, collective action is required now. And let me be specific. First, the world can no longer account for the environment as an externality. Our natural environment and health services are not free to our society. Once we lose these services, and experiences around the world suggest, often forever, the cost may prove catastrophic for global society. Therefore, we must integrate ecosystem services into our global market contracts. Carbon sequestration must only be the first step. This must be followed by valuation for biodiversity, water purification, water disposal, crop pollination, etc., etc. For this reason, we must now transform our natural environment into environmental capital. These valuable ecosystem services must be harnessed as engines for wealth creation for those rural communities that have traditionally cared for these assets. Ladies and gentlemen, let me try and lay out a historical parallel. Around 250 years ago, humanity began its dependence on a product of the Earth's geological services, hydrocarbons. Commercial coal production began around 1750 and was followed some 100 years later by the commercialization of oil. As a result, many of the rural poor became wealthy as hydrocarbons were discovered on the land. And as many of you know, some Middle Eastern nations have leveraged this wealth to transform ancient nomadic societies into economic powerhouses, with world-class cities now rising above the desert sands. However, our current economic addiction to fossil fuel has carried on increasingly dangerous side effect, our contribution to climate change. As highlighted earlier, climate change impact to becoming increasingly vicious for the people of my country and many Pacific Island countries. And we have not remained indifferent to this plight. Pacific Island countries have agreed to take certain actions to mitigate the effects of climate change. We have adopted a framework for action on climate change and disaster disaster risks reduction and disaster management framework for action. As part of the process, we have agreed to implement individual action plans for climate change. Pacific Island countries have also endorsed certain initiatives proposed by the international community under the auspices of the United Nations, Commonwealth, as well as our regional partners on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In Bali, the international community agreed to a post-2012 Kyoto Protocol framework on climate change. The most powerful nations of the world, the G8, committed themselves to reducing further harmful gas emissions. Pacific Island countries have identified climate change, adaptation and mitigation as requiring special attention. While we contribute less to the pollution that affects climate change, we have disproportionate responsibility to outlay huge resources to adapt and mitigate climate change effect on our countries. We need assistance in the transfer of appropriate technology that is eco-friendly. Ability to harness and utilize solar power, wind power, hydropower and biogas, gas and other clean energy technologies will greatly help the global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there are resources available under the World Bank, the United Nations, the Commonwealth, the European Commission, and from our other bilateral partners such as Australia and Japan. Pacific Island countries need to make full use of these resources envelope. Hopefully, extraneous conditions are not imposed to frustrate access to these funds. But all efforts I have highlighted are not enough. We need to do more. And Papua New Guinea believes a global paradigm shift is required. Today, we must correctly value a healthy and functioning natural environment. In the case of energy, with power investment, such transformation may energize our global economic growth from renewable resources, the sun, the wind, the sea, and the rivers, and geometral forces. For this reason, I have charged my new office of climate change and environmental sustainability to determine if Papua New Guinea can energize our future economic growth 100% from renewable energy. I'm asking, can we indeed become carbon neutral before 2050, while at the same time expanding our GDP per capita at least tenfold? However, as I look for future, it is clear that we must go further. And let me use the issue of deforestation and forest degradation as a case study. Deforestation is complex, but not simply. It is driven by the fact that the world values forest more dead than alive. Tropical rainforests are being cut down because we do not pay for their many valuable and diverse ecosystem services, such as climate stabilization, rainfall generation, water storage, water distillation, crop pollination, soil fertility, waste disposal, food control, pest control, and recreational services. Traditional economic theory, which considers ecosystem services a common good and thus free to all, is primarily responsible for this. So with these services, value at zero, rural communities that depend on the care for forest must make living in other ways. As they struggle to act out an existence, keeping the land, a forest, means sacrificing the opportunities to be gained by converting it into other users. Many deforest the land so as to trade low-value commodities, the timber, beef, palm oil, soy, coffee, and cocoa. In fact, these international commodity markets have already changed from colonial times. Ladies and gentlemen, in many ways, these economic relics are increasingly perverse and nonsensical. The environment is devastated, rural communities stay poor, and the rich shift the blame. They cite lack of governance and corruption. But these issues are not drivers of deforestation, but symptoms of obsolete market constructs. Market begins and ends with demand, and this is where we need to find the levers for the change. And we must shift the focus from systems to drivers, from blame to solution. As issue of deforestation demonstrate, we must empower rural communities for the first time to develop without deforesting, to develop without destroying the natural environment, and hereby creating sustainable wealth for themselves and future generations. For example, the latest estimate is that about $20 billion a year will be needed to halve carbon emissions from deforestation. But be wise investment, even for this one ecosystem services alone. According to the IPCC, a forest may sequester over 3.3 billion tons of CO2s annually. So with those, today's carbon processed around $33 TCO2s, the natural communities, owing most of them, are affecting, subsidizing the rich by $100 billion per year. Some companies are now valued in billions simply for advertising drinkers while we surface the internet. We surf the internet. Some countries make billions selling fossil fuels that pollutes our atmosphere. Others for producing low-cost consumer products that humanly does not require. Google is worth $150 billion, while the world's last, a great tropical forest left standing, are worth nothing. How can this be right? In Papua New Guinea, our old ways have allowed our 834 tribes to survive for over 50,000 years in a very challenging natural environment. But these ancient traditions have struggled to keep the pace within an increasingly complex future. With our true valuation for our vast environmental assets, we have struggled with schools that cannot afford the best teachers and health centers with only basic medicines. Yet, our rural communities still remember how to live sustainably, a skill many others have forgotten in the rush to get ahead. Therefore, whether we consider energy or tropical forests, the future increasingly is clear. Together we must reconstruct our value frameworks. New environmental services. Markets must support tropical countries striving towards sustainable development by generating environmental capital from ecosystem services that humanity has so far been exploiting for free. From the vision, we must forge new hope. However, bold leadership is required on both sides of the economic divide to transform the way we value our environment. By saying the forest indeed maybe humanity will relearn how to save ourselves. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.